The old war dog had been at the shelter for months, scarred and silent, refusing to acknowledge anyone who approached his kennel. Staff had given up hope of him ever trusting again. But Marcus Hayes, a struggling veteran barely keeping the lights on, saw something in those tired eyes, something he recognized from his own reflection. So when the storm hit and the shelter lost power, Marcus made a choice that seemed small at the time. He stayed through the night, sitting outside that kennel in the cold, just talking. What Marcus didn't know was that someone was watching from the parking lot, a man in an expensive suit who had been searching for this dog for 3 years, a man who had never stopped looking for his battle companion. And when that old dog finally responded to Marcus's voice, when he finally moved, finally showed life again, it triggered a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. Because the man in that parking lot was Colonel James Brennan, a defense contractor worth hundreds of millions, and he had just found the one person who could reach the dog he thought he'd lost forever. This is the story of how one veteran's compassion opened doors he never imagined possible, and how an old war dog brought 2 soldiers back from the edge. The rain hammered down on the cracked asphalt of the Riverside County Animal Shelter in Tucson, turning the parking lot into a maze of puddles that reflected the flickering streetlights. It was nearly midnight, and Marcus Hayes was supposed to have left hours ago. His shift had ended at 8, but the storm had knocked out half the shelter's power, and someone needed to stay behind to make sure the generators kept running. That someone was always Marcus. At 32, Marcus looked older than he was. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, his hands calloused and rough from years of hard work. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic before an IED explosion left him with a limp and a medical discharge. Now he worked at the shelter for barely above minimum wage, living paycheck to paycheck in a 1-bedroom apartment where the AC only worked half the time. But he didn't complain. He had seen worse. He had lived through worse. Marcus pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders as he made his rounds through the darkened kennels, checking on the animals. Most were asleep, curled up in their beds, unbothered by the storm. But when he reached the last kennel in the back corner, he stopped. Sergeant? That's what the intake paperwork had called him, though Marcus suspected it wasn't his real name. The German Shepherd had been brought in 3 months ago, found wandering the desert outside of town, half-starved and covered in scars. The vet estimated he was around 9 years old, and the tattoo inside his ear confirmed what Marcus had suspected the moment he saw him. Sergeant was a military working dog. But whoever had owned him, whoever had served alongside him, was gone. Sergeant sat in the back corner of his kennel, staring at nothing. His coat was dull, his ribs visible beneath his fur despite the staff's efforts to get him to eat. He didn't bark, he didn't wag his tail. He didn't acknowledge anyone who approached. He just sat there, day after day, like he was waiting for someone who would never come. Marcus had seen that look before, in the mirror, in the faces of the men he had served with, the ones who had made it home but never really left the war behind. He crouched down in front of the kennel, resting his arms on his knees. "Rough night, huh, buddy?" Marcus said quietly. Sergeant didn't move. Marcus exhaled, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Yeah, I get it." He stayed there for a long moment, just sitting in the silence. The rain pounded against the roof, the wind howling through the cracks in the walls. The shelter was falling apart, underfunded, understaffed, barely holding on, just like everything else in Marcus's life. But he stayed. "You know," Marcus continued, his voice soft, "I don't know what happened to you out there. I don't know who you lost, but I know what it feels like to be stuck, to feel like nobody's coming." Sergeant's ear twitched, just slightly. Marcus noticed. He leaned a little closer to the bars. "I was over in Kandahar when the blast hit. Lost 3 guys that day, good men. My best friend died in my arms, and I couldn't do a damn thing to stop it." His voice cracked just for a second before he cleared his throat. "They sent me home after that, told me I'd done enough, but it didn't feel like enough, still doesn't." For the first time in 3 months, Sergeant turned his head. Their eyes met. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition, a connection he hadn't expected. This dog understood. He had been there. He had seen the same things, lost the same way. "We're going to be okay," Marcus whispered. "I don't know how yet, but we will." Outside, hidden in the shadows of the parking lot, a black Mercedes sat with its engine idling. Inside, Colonel James Brennan gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched tight. He had finally found him, and he had just found the only person who could bring Sargent back. Marcus stayed at the shelter until 3 in the morning, long after the storm had passed. He sat outside Sargent's kennel, talking quietly, sharing stories about his time overseas, about the men he'd lost, about the weight that never seemed to lift. Sargent didn't move much, but his eyes stayed open, focused on Marcus in a way they hadn't been for anyone else. When Marcus finally stood to leave, his knees aching from sitting on the cold concrete, he glanced back one last time. Sargent was still watching him. "I'll see you tomorrow, buddy," Marcus said softly. For the first time, Sargent's tail moved, just once, a single hesitant wag. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. He smiled, a real smile, the kind he hadn't managed in months, and headed out into the night. The next morning, Marcus woke to a knock at his door. He groaned, rolling over to check his phone. 7:30. He'd only been asleep for 3 hours. Whoever was knocking had better have a damn good reason. He limped to the door, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, and peered through the peephole. A man stood on the other side, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit that looked completely out of place in this neighborhood. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, his posture military straight. Marcus frowned. He didn't know anyone who dressed like that. He opened the door just enough to see the man's face clearly. "Can I help you?" The man's gray eyes were sharp, assessing, but there was something else beneath the surface, something raw, almost vulnerable. "Marcus Hayes?" Marcus's hand instinctively moved to his side, old instincts kicking in. "Who's asking?" "My name is Colonel James Brennan," the man said, his voice low and controlled. "I need to talk to you about Sargent." Marcus's stomach dropped. He opened the door a little wider, studying the man more carefully now. "How do you know that name?" "Because he's mine," Brennan said simply. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Marcus's mind raced. He had suspected Sargent was a military dog, but he had never imagined the handler would actually show up. Most of the time, when these dogs ended up at shelters, it meant their handlers were dead or had moved on. "You're his handler," Marcus said slowly. Brennan nodded. "Was. 3 years ago, we were separated during an extraction in Syria. Our convoy was ambushed. I was medevaced out with a shattered leg, and by the time I got back, Sargent was gone. They told me he'd been transferred to another unit, but the records were a mess. I've been looking for him ever since." Marcus leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "And you just happened to find him at a shelter in Tucson?" "I hired a private investigator," Brennan said. "Took 2 years, but we finally tracked him down. I've been watching the shelter for the past week, trying to figure out the right time to approach." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Last night, I saw you with him." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You were watching?" "I was," Brennan admitted. "And I saw something I haven't seen in 3 years. I saw Sargent respond to someone." Marcus didn't know what to say to that. He glanced back into his apartment, at the mess of unpaid bills on his kitchen table, at the life he'd been barely holding together. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked finally. Brennan reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He held it out, but Marcus didn't take it. "I want to hire you," Brennan said. Marcus blinked. "Hire me?" "I run a defense contracting company, Brennan Defense Solutions. We work with the military, law enforcement, private security. I need someone who understands working dogs, someone Sargent trusts." Brennan's gaze didn't waver. "I need you." Marcus stared at the envelope like it might explode. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Brennan said. "I know you stayed at that shelter all night in the cold because you saw a dog that needed someone. I know you're a veteran who's been dealt a bad hand and kept going anyway. And I know my dog trusts you. Marcus swallowed hard. What's in the envelope? A job offer, $60,000 a year to start, full benefits, housing stipend. Marcus's breath caught. $60,000? That was more than double what he made now. Why? Marcus asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Why me? Brennan's expression softened just slightly. Because Sergeant chose you, and I trust his judgment more than anyone's. Marcus looked down at the envelope again. Slowly, he reached out and took it. 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself standing in the lobby of Brennan Defense Solutions in Phoenix, feeling like he'd just stepped onto another planet. The building was all glass and steel, sleek and modern, with a massive company logo etched into the marble floor. People in expensive suits moved through the space with purpose, their shoes clicking against the polished stone, their voices low and professional. Marcus tugged at the collar of his new shirt, the first button-down he'd owned in years, and tried not to look as out of place as he felt. His work boots, the only decent pair of shoes he owned, felt too heavy, too loud against the pristine floor. A woman approached from across the lobby, her heels sharp and precise. She was in her early 40s, blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun, wearing a gray pantsuit that probably cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe. Her smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Hayes," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Victoria Cross, Senior Vice President of Operations. Welcome to BDS." Marcus shook her hand, noting the way her gaze flickered over him, taking in his off-the-rack clothes, his military-issue watch, the slight limp in his step. He'd been sized up before. He knew what judgment looked like. "Thanks," Marcus said simply. "Colonel Brennan is waiting for you upstairs," Victoria continued, already turning toward the elevators. "I'll show you to his office." They rode up in silence, the elevator so smooth Marcus barely felt it moving. Victoria stood with her hands clasped in front of her, staring straight ahead. When the doors opened on the top floor, she led him down a hallway lined with photographs, military units, defense contracts, handshake deals with generals and politicians. She stopped outside a large corner office and knocked once before opening the door. "Colonel, Mr. Hayes is here." Brennan looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Victoria. That'll be all." Victoria's smile tightened. "Of course. Mr. Hayes, if you need anything, my office is just down the hall." The way she said it didn't sound like an offer. It sounded like a warning. The door closed behind her. Brennan gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Marcus sat, his eyes drifting to the window behind Brennan's desk. The view stretched across downtown Phoenix, the city sprawling out beneath them like a map. "How's Sergeant?" Marcus asked. For the first time, Brennan's expression softened. "Better. He's at my property outside the city, eating more, sleeping better." He paused. "He's been asking for you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Asking?" "He sits by the door every morning, waiting," Brennan said. "I think he expects you to show up." Something in Marcus's chest pulled tight. "I can visit him." "You'll do more than that," Brennan said, leaning forward. "Your job is to work with him, rehabilitate him, get him back to the dog he used to be." He slid a folder across the desk. "But first, you need to understand how things work here." Marcus opened the folder. Inside were contracts, NDAs, security clearances, pages and pages of legal jargon that made his head spin. "We don't just sell equipment," Brennan continued. "We train personnel, consult on military strategy, develop K-9 programs for law enforcement and private security. You'll be overseeing our new K-9 division." Marcus looked up sharply. "I'm not qualified for that." "You worked with combat medics. You understand chain of command, and you've got a connection with working dogs that most of my so-called experts don't have," Brennan said. "That's all the qualification I need." Before Marcus could respond, the door opened. A man in his 30s stepped inside, Derek Stone, Brennan's head of security. He was built like a linebacker, with close-cropped dark hair and a no-nonsense expression. "Sir, the briefing's in 10 minutes, Derek said, then glanced at Marcus. "You must be Hayes. Heard a lot about you." Marcus stood shaking Derek's hand. "All good, I hope." Derek smirked. Let's just say you've got people curious. Curious is one word for it, Brennan muttered, standing. Come on, I want you to sit in on this meeting. You need to see what we're dealing with. Marcus followed them down the hall to a conference room where a dozen executives were already seated, all eyes turning toward him the moment he walked in. He recognized the look immediately, the same one Victoria had given him in the lobby. Skepticism, doubt, judgment. Brennan didn't introduce him. He just gestured to an empty chair along the wall and began the meeting. Marcus sat quietly, watching, listening, learning. And the entire time he could feel Victoria's eyes on him from across the table. She didn't trust him. And Marcus had a feeling that was going to be a problem. The first real test came 3 weeks later. Marcus had spent most of that time out at Brennan's ranch, working with Sargent. The property was sprawling, 200 acres of desert landscape with a main house, stables, and a state-of-the-art K-9 training facility that Brennan had built years ago. Sargent had slowly started coming back to life. He ate regularly now, responded to basic commands, and had even started playing again, chasing a worn tennis ball across the yard with something that almost looked like joy. But inside BDS headquarters, Marcus was still the outsider, the guy who didn't belong. The charity case Brennan had picked up from a shelter. He heard the whispers in the hallways, saw the sidelong glances from executives who didn't think he deserved to be there. Victoria made sure he felt it too, assigning him endless paperwork, questioning every decision he made, reminding him at every turn that he was out of his depth. Marcus kept his head down and did the work. He'd dealt with worse. Then the call came. Brennan summoned him to his office early one morning, Derek already waiting inside. The colonel's expression was grim. "We have a situation," Brennan said without preamble. "The Phoenix PD is considering a contract with us to overhaul their K-9 unit. It's a $5 million deal, but they're skeptical. They've heard we're expanding into K-9 operations, but they want proof we know what we're doing." Marcus frowned. "What kind of proof?" "They want a demonstration," Derek said. "Tomorrow, they're sending their K-9 coordinator and 2 city council members to evaluate our capabilities." Brennan's gaze locked onto Marcus. "I want you to run it?" Marcus's stomach dropped. "Sir, I've only been here 3 weeks, and you've done more with Sargent in that time than anyone else could have done in 3 years. Brennan cut him off. "You know working dogs. You understand what they need, what they're capable of. I need you to show them that." Marcus looked between them, his mind racing. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. This was about proving Brennan hadn't made a mistake by hiring him, about showing all those skeptical executives that he belonged here. "What do they want to see?" Marcus asked finally. "Everything," Derek said. "Obedience, protection work, search and rescue simulation. They want to know our dogs can handle real-world scenarios." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll need Sargent." Brennan hesitated. "He's not fully recovered." "He's ready," Marcus said firmly. "Trust me." The next afternoon, Marcus stood in the training facility with Sargent at his side, watching as the Phoenix PD delegation arrived. The K-9 coordinator was a woman in her 50s named Captain Linda Reeves, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. The 2 council members looked bored already, like this was just another box to check. Victoria stood off to the side with several other BDS executives, her arms crossed, her expression carefully neutral. But Marcus could see the doubt in her eyes. She was waiting for him to fail. "Mr. Hayes will be running today's demonstration," Brennan announced. "He's the head of our new K-9 division." Captain Reeves looked Marcus up and down, then glanced at Sargent. "That's your dog?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. "He looks old." "He's experienced," Marcus corrected. 9 years in service, deployed 3 times. He knows what real work looks like." Reeves raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Marcus took a breath and began. He ran Sargent through obedience drills first. Sit, stay, heel, down. The dog responded flawlessly, his movements sharp and precise despite his age. Then came the protection work. Marcus had Derek play the role of a suspect, and Sargent performed a controlled apprehension that was textbook perfect, aggressive when needed, but stopping the instant Marcus gave the command. But it was the search and rescue simulation that really mattered. Marcus had hidden a training dummy in a collapsed structure Derek had built in the far corner of the facility. Sergeant had 30 seconds to find it. Marcus unclipped the leash. "Sergeant! Seek!" The dog took off, nose to the ground, weaving through debris and rubble with the kind of focus that only came from years of real-world experience. 20 seconds later, Sergeant barked, sharp, insistent, and sat down beside the dummy. Perfect. Captain Reeves glanced at the council members, then back at Marcus. Her expression had changed. The skepticism was gone. "That," she said slowly, "is exactly what we need." Brennan stepped forward, extending his hand. "Then let's talk contract." As the delegation moved toward the conference room, Marcus caught Victoria's eye across the facility. Her jaw was tight, her expression unreadable. But Marcus didn't care. He'd just proven he belonged here, and Sergeant had proven it with him. The Phoenix PD contract was signed 2 weeks later, and overnight, Marcus became the face of BDS's Canine division. Brennan promoted him officially, gave him a team, and increased his salary. For the first time since leaving the military, Marcus felt like he had a purpose again, something worth fighting for. But success bred resentment. Victoria had been with BDS for 12 years, clawing her way up through the ranks, building her reputation as Brennan's most trusted executive. And now, this nobody, this shelter worker Brennan had pulled off the street, was getting accolades, promotions, attention that should have been hers. She smiled through it all, congratulated Marcus in meetings, played the supportive colleague. But behind closed doors, she was plotting. It started small. Documents Marcus needed would go missing. Meetings he was supposed to attend wouldn't make it onto his calendar. Equipment orders he'd submitted would get delayed or canceled. Marcus chalked it up to growing pains, to adjusting to corporate life. He didn't realize he was being set up. Then came the audit. Marcus was at the ranch with Sergeant when Derek called, his voice tight and urgent. "You need to get back to Phoenix, now." "What's going on?" "There's been a financial discrepancy," Derek said. $50,000 missing from the Canine Division budget, and your signature is all over the withdrawal forms. Marcus's blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I never authorized any withdrawals." "I know that. Brennan knows that. But the board doesn't. They've called an emergency meeting. You've got 2 hours. Marcus made the drive from the ranch in 90 minutes, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His mind raced through every transaction, every approval, every signature he'd put on paperwork over the past 2 months. He'd been careful. He'd documented everything. But when he arrived at BDS and saw the evidence laid out in Brennan's office, his stomach dropped. There were bank transfers, vendor invoices for equipment that was never delivered, purchase orders with his digital signature authorizing payments to shell companies that didn't exist. $50,000 siphoned out of the Canine Division over 6 weeks, and every trail led back to Marcus. "This isn't me," Marcus said, his voice raw. "Sir, I swear to God I didn't do this." Brennan stood at the window, his back to Marcus, his shoulders rigid. "I want to believe that." "Then believe it," Marcus pressed. "Someone set me up." Brennan turned, and for the first time since Marcus had met him, the colonel looked tired, worn down. "The board is calling for your termination. They want you arrested." Marcus's breath caught. "Arrested? Embezzlement? Fraud? Wire fraud?" Brennan's jaw tightened. "These are federal charges, Marcus. If this goes to the authorities, you're looking at prison time." The room spun. Marcus gripped the edge of Brennan's desk, trying to steady himself. He'd survived 2 tours in Afghanistan. He'd survived losing his friends, his career, his sense of purpose. But this could destroy him completely. "Who's pushing for this?" Marcus asked quietly. Brennan hesitated. "Victoria's leading the internal investigation." Of course she was. Marcus looked up, meeting Brennan's eyes. "She did this. She's been undermining me since day 1. "I know," Brennan said, and the admission hung heavy in the air. "But I can't prove it. Not yet." "So what happens now?" Brennan exhaled slowly. "The board meets in 48 hours. If we don't have evidence proving your innocence by then, I won't be able to protect you. They'll force me to let you go, and they'll turn everything over to the FBI." Marcus felt the walls closing in. His whole life, every time he'd started to build something, it got ripped away. The military, his health, his friends, and now this. "I didn't do this," Marcus said again, his voice breaking slightly. "I wouldn't—" "I know," Brennan said, and there was something fierce in his tone now. "Which is why we're going to find out who did." Derek appeared in the doorway, a laptop under his arm. "I've already started pulling server logs. If someone forged Marcus's signature, there'll be a digital trail." Brennan nodded. "We work through the night if we have to. We find the truth." Marcus looked between them. These two men who barely knew him, who had no reason to trust him, but were willing to fight for him anyway. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why are you doing this?" Brennan's expression softened, just slightly. "Because Sergeant trusts you. And if there's one thing I've learned in 30 years of service, it's that dogs don't lie." He stepped forward, extending his hand. "So let's prove them wrong." Marcus shook it, gripping tight. They had 48 hours to save his life. They worked through the night in Brennan's office, the city lights of Phoenix glowing through the windows as the hours bled together. Derek had pulled every server log, every email chain, every digital footprint associated with the K-9 division budget. Marcus sat at the conference table, exhausted but wired, reviewing transaction records he'd never seen before. "These vendor invoices," Marcus said, holding up a stack of papers, "I never approved these. I've never even heard of Desert K-9 Supply or Summit training equipment." Derek typed rapidly on his laptop. "Both registered as LLCs 6 months ago, same month you were hired." He clicked through screens, his eyes narrowing. "And both list the same registered agent, a law firm in Scottsdale that specializes in corporate shells." Brennan leaned over Derek's shoulder. "Can you trace the bank accounts?" "Working on it," Derek muttered. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. The transfers were routed through 3 different accounts before landing in an offshore account in the Caymans. Marcus felt the frustration building in his chest. They were running out of time, and every lead seemed to hit a wall. "Wait," Derek said suddenly, his fingers freezing over the keyboard. "The digital signatures. Marcus, when you sign off on documents, what device do you use?" "My work laptop," Marcus said. "Why?" "Because these authorizations were signed from a different IP address." Derek pulled up a log. "Your laptop shows you were logged in from the ranch on these dates, but the signatures were generated from inside this building. 4th floor. Brennan's expression darkened. Victoria's floor. Marcus stood, his heart pounding. "Can you prove it was her computer?" Derek shook his head. "Not directly. The signature software uses a shared authentication system. Anyone with admin access could theoretically generate a signature from any terminal." "Who has admin access?" Marcus asked. "Senior executives," Derek said, "which includes Victoria, the CFO, and 3 others." Brennan paced to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "We need more than circumstantial evidence. The board won't move against a senior VP based on an IP address." Marcus's mind raced. There had to be something they were missing, some thread they hadn't pulled yet. He thought back over the past 2 months, every interaction with Victoria, every meeting, every carefully worded email. Then he remembered. "The equipment," Marcus said suddenly. "The stuff that was supposedly ordered but never delivered. Where was it supposed to be shipped?" Derek pulled up the invoices. "The ranch, your training facility." "Check the security footage," Marcus said, leaning forward. "If equipment was actually delivered, there'd be a record. If it wasn't, then we know the orders were fake from the start." Derek's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the ranch's security system. He scrolled through weeks of footage, fast-forwarding through days of nothing but empty driveways and passing wildlife. "Nothing," Derek said after 20 minutes. "No deliveries, not a single truck." "So the orders were fraudulent," Brennan said. "But we still can't prove Victoria created them." Marcus slumped back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. They were close, so damn close, but it wasn't enough. Then Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting. "It's Reeves. Captain Reeves from Phoenix PD." Brennan frowned. "Why is she calling you at 2 in the morning?" Derek answered, putting it on speaker. "Captain?" "Stone, sorry to call so late," Reeves's voice crackled through. but I just got a weird email. Someone claiming to be from BDS asking if we wanted to renegotiate our contract terms. Said there were irregularities with the Canine Division's financial oversight. Marcus and Brennan exchanged a look. Who sent it? Brennan asked, his voice sharp. Victoria Cross, Reeves said. I thought it was strange, so I wanted to check with you first before responding. Derek pulled up his laptop. Captain, can you forward me that email? Already done. The email appeared on Derek's screen seconds later. Marcus read over his shoulder, his pulse quickening. Victoria had sent it from her personal email address, not her BDS account, and buried in the metadata was something even more damning. She attached internal financial documents, Derek said slowly. Documents that are classified. She wasn't supposed to have access to these outside the secure network. Brennan's jaw clenched. She's trying to sabotage the Phoenix PD contract, make it look like we're incompetent so she can swoop in and save the deal. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. She wasn't just trying to frame me, she was trying to take over the whole division. Derek looked up from his laptop. I can trace the document access logs. If she pulled these files, there'll be a record. He typed for another 10 minutes, and then his face hardened. Got her. Victoria accessed these files 4 days ago from her office terminal. She downloaded them to an external drive. Brennan straightened, his voice like steel. That's corporate espionage. That's our evidence. Marcus exhaled, feeling the weight lift slightly from his chest. They had her. Board meetings in 6 hours, Brennan said, checking his watch. Let's make sure we're ready. The boardroom was cold, sterile, designed to make people uncomfortable. 20 executives sat around the long mahogany table, their faces impassive as Marcus walked in with Brennan and Derek. Victoria was already seated near the head of the table, her posture perfect, her expression sympathetic in a way that made Marcus's skin crawl. She looked at him like he was already finished. The board chairman, Gerald Hartwick, a silver-haired man in his 60s with the demeanor of someone who'd never been told no, gestured to an empty chair at the far end of the table. Mr. Hayes, please, sit. Marcus remained standing. I'd rather not, sir. Hartwick's eyebrow lifted. This is a formal proceeding, Mr. Hayes. We have serious allegations to address. Allegations that are completely false, Marcus cut in. His voice was steady, controlled. He'd spent years as a combat medic making life-or-death decisions under pressure. A boardroom full of suits didn't scare him. Victoria's expression shifted, just slightly. A flicker of irritation before the mask of concern slid back into place. Marcus, no one wants to believe this, but the evidence is fabricated, Marcus said flatly, turning to face her directly. And you know it, because you're the one who created it. A murmur rippled through the room. Hartwick held up a hand. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Hayes. Do you have proof? Marcus glanced at Brennan, who gave a slight nod. Derek stepped forward, opening his laptop and connecting it to the room's display screen. Over the past 48 hours, we've conducted a thorough investigation into the financial discrepancies, Derek began, his voice crisp and professional. What we found was a deliberate, systematic effort to frame Mr. Hayes for embezzlement. The screen lit up with a series of documents, bank transfers, vendor invoices, digital signatures. These transactions were authorized using Mr. Hayes's digital signature, Derek continued, but the signatures were generated from a terminal on the 4th floor of this building, while Mr. Hayes was logged in remotely from Colonel Brennan's ranch 60 miles away. Victoria's face remained perfectly composed. That doesn't prove anything. The authentication system has known vulnerabilities. Anyone could have exploited them. True, Derek said, which is why we dug deeper. He pulled up another screen, server access logs. 4 days ago, someone accessed classified financial documents and downloaded them to an external drive. Those same documents were then sent to Captain Linda Reeves of the Phoenix Police Department in an attempt to undermine our contract. Hartwick leaned forward, his expression darkening. Who accessed those files? Derek met Victoria's eyes. Victoria Cross, from her office terminal. We have timestamps, IP addresses, and security footage of her entering and leaving her office at the exact times the files were accessed. The room went silent. Victoria's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. This is ridiculous. I was conducting due diligence on behalf of the company. Due diligence doesn't involve sending classified documents from your personal email to external parties, Brennan said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. He stood, walking slowly around the table until he was directly across from Victoria. You weren't protecting the company. You were trying to sabotage it. Victoria's mask finally cracked. Her eyes flashed with anger. You brought him in, she hissed, pointing at Marcus. Some nobody from a shelter, and suddenly he's running a division that should have been mine. I built this company with you, Jim. I earned my place here. By committing corporate espionage? Brennan's voice was ice cold. By framing an innocent man? By trying to destroy a contract worth millions? Victoria shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. He doesn't belong here. He's not qualified. He saved a dog you would have ignored, Brennan interrupted. He built a program from nothing and secured a major contract in 8 weeks. He did more in 2 months than you've done in 2 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Hartwick cleared his throat, his expression grim. Miss Cross, in light of this evidence, I'm afraid we have no choice. You're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building, and our legal team will be in contact regarding potential criminal charges. Victoria's face went pale. You can't. We can, Hartwick said. And we are. 2 security guards appeared at the door. Victoria looked around the room, searching for support, for sympathy, but found none. Finally, her gaze landed on Marcus. You don't deserve this, she said, her voice shaking with rage. Marcus met her eyes, his expression calm. Neither did Sergeant. But here we are. Victoria turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, the guards flanking her on either side. Hartwick turned to Marcus. Mr. Hayes, on behalf of the board, I apologize. You've been cleared of all charges. Marcus nodded slowly, the tension finally draining from his shoulders. Brennan extended his hand. Welcome back. Marcus shook it, gripping tight. Good to be back, sir. 3 years later, the sun rose over Tucson, casting golden light across the sprawling campus of the Brennan Hayes Veterans and K-9 Foundation. What had once been an empty lot on the outskirts of the city was now a state-of-the-art facility, training grounds, rehabilitation centers, veterinary clinics, and housing for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. The sign at the entrance read, "Where second chances become new beginnings." Marcus stood on the front steps, watching as a convoy of vans pulled up to the main building. Today was intake day, 20 new veterans and 15 rescue dogs arriving for the Foundation's 12-week program. It was the largest group they'd taken on yet, and Marcus felt the familiar flutter of nerves mixed with anticipation. Derek walked up beside him, clipboard in hand. Ready for this? Marcus smiled. Always. The vans opened and veterans began filing out. Men and women of all ages, some with visible injuries, others carrying invisible scars. They looked tired, uncertain, like they weren't sure if this place could really help them. Marcus recognized that look. He'd worn it himself not long ago. Behind them, the dogs were unloaded. German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Labradors, most of them former military or police dogs who had been retired, abandoned, or surrendered. Each one paired with a veteran who needed them just as much as they needed a handler. Marcus descended the steps, approaching the group. Welcome to the Brennan Hayes Foundation. I'm Marcus Hayes, and I know exactly where you've been. I know what it's like to feel like the world moved on without you, like you don't fit anywhere anymore. The veterans watched him, some skeptical, others hopeful. But here's the truth, Marcus continued. You do fit, and these dogs, they're going to show you how. A young woman in the back, couldn't have been more than 25, raised her hand hesitantly. What if we can't do it? What if we fail? Marcus's expression softened. Then you get back up and try again. That's what we do here. No judgment, no timelines, just progress. He gestured toward the building. Come on, let me introduce you to someone. Marcus led the group through the facility, past training rooms and therapy spaces, until they reached a large outdoor enclosure at the back of the property. Inside, a German Shepherd sat in the shade, his coat now full and healthy, his eyes alert and bright. Sergeant. The dog's ears perked up the moment he saw Marcus, and he rose to his feet, tail wagging. Marcus opened the gate and Sergeant trotted over, leaning against his leg in the way he always did. "This is Sergeant," Marcus said, scratching behind the dog's ears. 3 years ago, he was in a shelter, broken and alone. He'd given up, stopped eating, stopped trusting, stopped believing anyone was coming for him. He paused, looking out at the group. "I found him on the worst night of my life, and he saved me just as much as I saved him." One of the veterans, a man in his 40s with a prosthetic leg, stepped forward. "Does it get easier?" Marcus considered the question. "It gets different. Some days are still hard, but you learn to carry it better, and you don't have to carry it alone." Behind him, a familiar voice called out, "Marcus!" He turned to see Brennan walking across the yard, a teenage girl beside him, his daughter Sophie, who volunteered at the foundation every weekend. She waved enthusiastically before running ahead to greet the new dogs. Brennan reached Marcus's side, watching the veterans begin to interact with the dogs, the first tentative connections forming. "Good turnout," he said quietly. "Best one yet," Marcus agreed. Brennan glanced at him. "You did this, you know, this whole thing. It started because you saw a dog who needed help and didn't walk away." Marcus shook his head. "No, sir. It started because you saw something in me worth fighting for." Brennan's expression softened. "We saw something in each other." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching as a young veteran knelt beside a scarred Belgian Malinois, whispering something the dog seemed to understand. The dog's tail wagged slowly, cautiously, and the veteran smiled, genuinely smiled, for what looked like the first time in a long time. Sergeant pressed closer to Marcus's side, and Marcus rested his hand on the dog's head, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. 3 years ago, Marcus had been working double shifts at a shelter, barely scraping by, wondering if his life would ever mean anything again. Now he was standing on the grounds of a foundation that had already helped hundreds of veterans and dogs find their way back. Derek appeared with the intake paperwork. "Where do you want to start?" Marcus looked out at the veterans, at the dogs, at the second chances waiting to unfold. "Let's start with introductions. Everyone deserves to know their scene." As the group moved inside, Brennan put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud." Marcus's throat tightened. He'd lost her 2 years ago, but not before she'd seen him rebuild his life, not before she'd visited the foundation and watched him work. "Yeah," he said softly. "She would." Sergeant barked once, sharp and clear, and took off running toward the training yard where Sophie was setting up an obstacle course. Marcus laughed, watching the old war dog move with a joy that had seemed impossible 3 years ago. "Come on," Marcus said to Brennan. "We've got work to do." And together they walked toward the future they'd built, one act of kindness at a time. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button and subscribe to hear more incredible tales of courage, loyalty, and second chances. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that reminds us all, heroes come in all forms, and sometimes they have 4 paws.